Today's episode is one I've been looking forward to for a while, because every once in a while, you get a conversation where culture, industry, history, and the future of a region all intersect at one place. And that's kind of what this episode feels like. We're talking about something most people don't realize is already happening across the inland Northwest right now, which is the quiet positioning of places like Mountain Home and the greater Boise Valley inside the next generation of aerospace manufacturing and supply chain growth in the United States. And the two guys joining me today have had a front row seat to that story from very different angles. Dale King, Economic Development Director of Mountain Home, someone who's been working closely and directly on what the future of that region could look like. And Dean Cameron, publisher of Northwest Aerospace News, who spent decades inside the aerospace supplier ecosystem across the Pacific Northwest and literally helped tell the story of the industry as it evolved. But here's what I love about this conversation already. Before aerospace, before manufacturing, before economic strategy, there's a Spokane radio station, a rejected demo record, somebody accidentally becoming one of the first people in Washington to spin AC/DC in 1977. So clearly, we're starting in the right place today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. And as mentioned, I have two good friends of mine, Dean and Dale, joining me here today. How you guys doing?
Doing great, Gordy. How about yourself?
I'm doing awesome. Hey, as mentioned in my intro, I got to kickstart with this. I heard little bird told me that way back in 1977, Dean, you ended up spinning, one of the first AC/DC demo records in Washington State, probably before most people even knew who they were, right?
Yeah, pretty much nobody knew who they were. So they sent out a series of demo albums to radio stations, and we had the rock station back in 1977 was KJRB in Spokane, and they rejected the AC/DC demo album.
Oh, wow.
And I was in a class that was a radio and TV licensing class, and I was a morning DJ in that class, and so we played that very rejected AC/DC first album in the United States and kind of took on a life of its own.
Yeah, that's wild. So going from AC/DC to aerospace, it sounds like pretty wild and out there, right? But it's actually true. And so how does somebody go from spinning AC/DC demos in Spokane to covering aerospace manufacturing across the Pacific Northwest?
Well, I've always been an aerospace geek, and so even as a little kid, I built the plastic models and hung them from my ceiling, and I was always interested in the aerospace industry. And as an adult, got into manufacturing, and in would have been 1990, I merged a company that I started many years prior with a plastics company, and we entered the aerospace industry doing commercial aircraft interiors, and then ended up really serving worldwide airlines and providing seating and commercial aircraft interior components for just about every aspect of the aircraft.
Wow. So unpack that a little bit further there, because I think it had been mentioned before that there's a lot of components or companies that touch a single airline right before it actually ever flies. There's a lot that goes into it. What does that look like from the inside?
Well, I think there's, if I remember right, there's 3 million individual parts on a 737.
Wow.
And so companies manufacture all of those components. I mean, and we were involved in the seating part of the industry primarily, but you've got tray tables and shrouds and components that are underneath the seat, and then you multiply that times hundreds of seats, and so there's just a lot of opportunity from a manufacturing standpoint in the aerospace industry.
Wow.
I don't even know how many parts are on a 747, but tens of millions of parts.
That's right. Pretty insane. Well, Dell, and yourself, your path is interesting because you've kind of lived both in the media world and now, economic development leadership as well. What pulled you towards working on the future of a place like Mountain Home?
I started in rural economic development back in about 2000. I got my feet wet in that, and I really fell in love with rural economic development. Being raised in a place like Kirkland, the home of Costco, and certainly Boeing. I had relatives that worked for Boeing, were in aerospace, pilots, commercial pilots. So aerospace aviation has been in my background for generations. And so, but growing up, I really consider my best friend and I Boeing brats, being raised on the east side of Seattle. But I also lived in Bremerton and rural areas and cut my teeth in that region doing regional economic development and focusing on a singular industry. When you reach your arms out and gather in 1, 2, 3 counties in rural areas, you can have an aggregate that's pretty meaningful and that you can work with to do rural economic development. And so when I moved down to Caldwell in 23 and to be closer to family, I was looking across the valley at Elmore County, which wasn't developed yet. And we all know about the Treasure Valley, Boise region, just exploding in growth, which I believe is still organic and still just starting. Micron is under development. They're 30 miles away, 30, 40 miles away from us. And their suppliers are still, in transit. I mean, and Micron, they're on their first fab. They're doing 4 of them, and the first one's massive. And so I'm looking across the valley from a developing valley to a community that just is getting started.
Yeah.
And so I was really excited about, being able to apply some of my background and experience to help Elmore County and Mountain Home specifically with this. So when I came to aerospace, it was just a natural because aerospace manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, this state is heavily involved, obviously, in nuclear. It's the birth of the nuclear Navy is here in the state. And with the state really advocating the commercialization of energy, i.e. nuclear specifically, we're really strategically placed to be, for the manufacturers to be close to the university without being in the fray of the valley.
Yeah.
And so we have room to spread out. We're working on getting more space and more acreages in order to accommodate really a strong industrial base here in Mountain Home.
Yeah. Wow. That's insightful. When I think of this whole space that we're kind of getting into, with aerospace as a whole, I mean, for the average person, I think people assume that aerospace equals Seattle or some other place and not necessarily this region. But from your perspective, Dean, I'll toss this over to you. What do you see has changed in the last decade across the inland Northwest that people in Boise probably haven't noticed yet?
Well, I mean, you talk about aerospace in Seattle, and you're absolutely right. There's a tremendous amount of aerospace manufacturing and focus on the Seattle region. Obviously, it's the home of Boeing. But Seattle is, if you're looking at the glass half full or half empty, Seattle's glass is overflowing. Yeah. And so, there's a lot of opportunity for Boeing. There's Boeing and then also tier 1s and tier 2 suppliers to look outside of that region for resources in order to accommodate production. And that's really the big issue right now is, hitting the throughput, hitting the demand. The analysts, Dale and I both have heard analysts talk about the fact, hold on to your hat, aerospace is going to double in the next 10 years.
Right.
And so, those manufacturing resources all over the Pacific Northwest, all over the United States for that matter, they're valuable. And it's not just a focus on Seattle, not even just focus on Washington. I mean, Idaho is very close and Mountain Home is prime for, growth and opportunity. So,
Are we already seeing, is this early positioning stage for all this, or are you starting to see that suppliers are already kind of moving inland?
Been moving for quite some time.
Okay.
And so there's a number of different member-based organizations. So my publishing company, we sponsor a lot of member-based organizations. There's PNAA and AFA and PNDC and AUVSI and NEMA, and they're all member-based manufacturing organizations, and so and they're located all over the Northwest. I mean, from Montana to Idaho, Oregon, Washington, Southern British Columbia, kind of we're all walking arm in arm in lockstep.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, Dale, you've also mentioned, that Mountain Home is kind of like this blank slate right now, right? And you believe aerospace manufacturing could be a part of its future.
It is. Aerospace manufacturing is such, almost feels like a preset future for this region. Just with the Air Force Base here and the influence of the Air Force Base, we've had thousands and thousands of airplane mechanics come through this region. I mean, Mountain Home is world known. And I found that in rural economic development, where so many times, or any economic development, you'll have an industry that's really renowned throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
And yet locally, people don't know anything about it because their community is global. And so, and then when you consider the fact that at any given time, we have hundreds, thousands of aviation or A&P mechanics, airframe and power plant. Now they're not dubbed that because they're military, but they could simply walk out of there and take a test and really qualify for all of that. And you have the level of engineering with those A&Ps is seriously higher than you're going to get out of a conventional school, where someone goes to school for 14 months and gets their A&P certification and goes and turns wrenches, say at Embraer or someplace. And so the level of sophistication and education in our mechanics and aviation personnel in the region is pretty significant. And it's funny, I was at the PNAA conference some weeks ago. Dean and I saw each other there, and an old friend of mine, JC Hall, I was chatting with him. He said, Dale, Mountain Home, I flew F-111s out of there. And I thought, of course you did. I mean, I was talking to Bill King, and Bill King is a longtime Seattle aerospace aviation professional. And Bill's like, I think I flew a B-52 out of there once, and so it's the connections go on and on. And so the connection between aviation, the working on the jets. I mean, this is an incredible location for MROs, especially for companies that are based in the East and they want to come west and they need Western location. I've talked to some different logistics professionals, and we don't really have a lot of competition with regards to some of the assets we have with rail. We have the interstate right next door. We have natural gas. We have 2 wellheads feeding our natural gas lines. We're set up to have the infrastructure come in now. And so I'm reaching out to developers and people that know how to do this stuff to get the groundwork done. So we have, thousands of shovel-ready acres for the manufacturers when they're ready to get here.
Yeah. I would also add too that, we're talking about the different opportunities from a workforce standpoint. Yeah. The aviation industry offers a better than median average income as well, so that people that work within the aerospace industry have a lot of opportunity to contribute to the local economy as well.
Right. Hey, Dean, I got a question for you. Have you found that aerospace manufacturers like high school students coming out of school and having the first shot at training them and raising them up in the industry?
Absolutely. Right now, workforce is the buzzword because, companies can't, they've got great book of business. I mean, they're writing up orders left and right. Yeah. But filling the machines and having the employees to be able to manufacture their book of business has been a challenge. And so, rather than 50 companies fighting for the same 10 employees, go to the well, go to where you can train people to work the way you need them to work. And so the high schools, and then even before that, I mean, opportunity to share, I'm a publisher, so I publish Northwest Aerospace News Magazine, which is an industry trade magazine worldwide. We have a little over 11,000 worldwide subscribers, but we also launched a magazine called Let's Go Aerospace, which is focused on reaching out to middle school age kids to kind of prep them to join the high school train of learning more about advanced manufacturing and to be able to enter the workforce.
Right. I think there's a difficulty with the pipeline, Dean, because young people just don't know. They just don't know about it.
That's it. They don't know.
And the marketing isn't out there in the common airways that go get a job in aerospace. It's just not there. And so I'll throw something out of you, Dean, that a little AI research I did recently. Here in Mountain Home, we have about 276 graduates in 2026, and about the high school. I mean, that's not a full aggregate, but about 226. I reached out and looked at I-84. So we're on the I-84 corridor south of Boise. And as I said, basically not basically, but between Boise or Mountain Home and the Utah border on I-84, reaching out about 50 to 100 miles from I-84, how many high school graduates? When you look at an aggregate, which I love looking at aggregates in rural, about 2,600 graduates in 2026. And those are great kids looking for great jobs that would love to move to a rural community that's a drive home, and get on the interstate and drive home. So we have these elegant freeways. Let's use them.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that came to mind as you guys were kind of pumping through, this here was what this looks like from like an ecosystem perspective there in that region specifically, Dale. Let's say you could say Mountain Home, or you could say the ripple effect out towards the Treasure Valley area as a whole. But when somebody's thinking about, this development in this arena for aerospace, and you think of a company like Boeing, who kind of owns the lion's share of a region, perhaps, right? Is something like that what's needed in order to pump this within a region here, or is it something different? Like, help us understand what that would look like potentially.
Gordy, ask me the question again. I don't know that I really understood what you're asking.
Yeah. So is this about one singular large scale employer in a region that could pump an ecosystem like this, or is this something different?
And Dean I'll love to hear what Dean has to say here, because it really is an ecosystem. That's the beauty of, if you have one aerospace employer, you're going to have other shops around them, feeding them what they need and supporting them what they need. There's certainly some aerospace manufacturers out there that are doing a lot of those parts in-house, which is pretty elegant because the communication and whatnot. But Dean will tell you from his experience how they worked as an ecosystem to capture business. When they had buyers coming to town, and Dean, I'm stealing your thunder a little bit, but when they had buyers coming to town, Dean would coordinate tours with multiple companies, yet he worked for one. And so, Dean, I'd love to hear you speak to that and the collaboration. That's one thing I love about the aerospace industry, is the level of trust and relationships, et cetera.
Well, and so, as Dale was mentioning, I mean, you don't need Boeing to move to Mountain Home to have an aerospace market. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite. You get machine shops and sheet metal facilities and composites manufacturers, electronics companies, all of them work together to be able to provide the components that is needed to build a 737. And the more that those companies, they all typically use the same 3D modeling programs, whether it's SolidWorks or CATIA or whatever it is. And so when a project comes to light where Boeing needs, a seat assembly of some kind or another, and it requires injection molding, it requires sheet metal, it requires thermoplastics and, machine components or, whatever, the more those companies can work together, and Boeing or a tier one supplier can visit one location and go visit the 5 companies that provide those components for that assembly, it's efficient. It's preferable because Boeing wants to be able, or their tier one supplier wants to pull something out of a box and attach it. They don't want to have to set up a line with 5 guys to put all those parts together to be able to create that assembly. So it's providing a value to the client. And Boeing is going to be in South Carolina and Everett and Renton, and I don't look for Boeing to build a plant in Mountain Home. Dale will tell me otherwise, but it's the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 suppliers that they're the backbone of the economy.
Dean, when you say that, one of the things that's been interesting to me is with the rise of nuclear and the small modular reactors. They can put those on a train car. And that's the one thing I would like to see final assembly and manufacturing here in Mountain Home, because we're so close to the universities. But again, we have space to spread out, the warehousing, the rail. And, the idea of dropping those on a rail car, shooting them over to INL for fueling and testing, and then they can be commercialized. And so there is a place for Mountain Home to be an OEM, final assembly and OEM. But it's not for Boeing. But it is those aerospace manufacturers. Years ago, we were looking at putting together a group that was focused on advanced manufacturing workforce and workforce pipeline, because the skills are very similar between advanced energy and nuclear energy and aerospace and other in other sectors. And so the certifications are just different. And so then it comes down to a collaboration on the certification so that we're not siloing our industry so much. That is a gargantuan task.
Yeah.
I understand that. That's gargantuan. But let's start, and building stronger feedback loops from industry to education. That's always a good idea.
And coming from that manufacturing background, we produced a lot of aerospace components, but we also produced a lot of components for the medical industry and for commercial industrial.
Right.
And, and so to find yourself, as Dale said, siloed into one industry is dangerous.
Yeah.
Find yourself manufacturing to the same quality standards, the same manufacturing processes to multiple industries. And that's where, when you have an advanced manufacturing ecosystem within a region, it becomes very attractive for a number of companies.
Right. Right.
I want to run it back to what you're involved in as well, and you've been involved in for decades here now, Dean, which is Northwest Aerospace News. Unpack like what the importance is, like the significance behind storytelling and like shaping how an industry grows, because obviously that has to be a part, I would think, of kind of your way of doing this, because or reason for doing it, because you've been doing it for so long, unless I'm off.
No, you're right on. And so, my background in manufacturing, how would I get the word out about what we produced and provided to a lot of clients? And back in those days, it was jump on an airplane, fly across the country, buy a steak dinner, try and get an opportunity to quote on something. And, trying to get in front of the right people and the engineers and so forth. It was obviously challenging, but that was kind of the genesis for the creation of Northwest Aerospace News Magazine. We're an industry trade magazine with 11,000 worldwide subscribers and growing. And our primary focus is telling the stories of the manufacturers, people that build the parts that go on the plane. Whereas most industry trade magazines are talking, very high level news and whatnot, which is great. I used to receive those magazines as well. But, we write about, a machine shop or a sheet metal facility and tell their story and their capabilities. Well, that goes out to OEMs and tier ones who look at that and say, holy cow, we need a new supplier. Here's one. Hand the magazine over to the purchasing guy, say, give these guys a call. So we've been or have become somewhat of a sourcing guide for the industry, being able to share companies and their capabilities with a larger audience. And then that's rolled into Let's Go Aerospace too, because, how do you continue that? I tell people the stuff you see on the news today and all the new technology, and talk about, bases on the moon and different satellite technology and everything else. That's great news material, but it's today's 12-year-old that's going to mature that technology in 10 years.
Yeah.
We better start talking to the 12-year-olds.
Yeah.
I sat on a CTE board in Washougal, Washington, some years ago, and I sat on that board because the director at Washougal High School was pretty progressive, and she had actually been a part of setting up the aviation program at the Skill Center. And so if the students put their heads down and wanted to learn aviation, they could do 2 years there if they got selected for the second year, and then they could matriculate. That could be their running start program for Washington State. They can have their first 2 years in their associate's degree, and then matriculate into Green River College. And by the time they're 20, they could be graduating with a degree in aviation, which I thought was brilliant. And so, of course, but one of my young people, my kids, I shared with them, choose a exploring careers program, 2 pages. Skill Center is loaded with different career options. They walked right past aviation. Why? Because we just hadn't been exposed to it. He hadn't been exposed to it. And so he walked right past it, chose 4, asked him, choose 4, and then we'll talk about it. And he didn't choose aviation. So I said, okay, well, I want you to consider aviation, but it's got to be your choice. He was 14 at the time. He came back 2 days later and said, I want to do aviation. And so he spent 3 weeks, 5 days a week, from 8 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, getting inundated with all the aspects of aviation. And he's turning wrenches down at Embraer south of Atlanta now. So
very cool.
He's got his AMP, and he will always have a job. That this industry will never end. He's a leader, a natural leader. He's in a killer environment, an excellent environment for industry, and so it's just not out of reach for young people to step into this industry.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It makes me think of, like, regardless of political climate, there's an opportunity here to be able to grow aerospace. And so what does that kind of actually look like from a support perspective, whether that's workforce, infrastructure? I want to kind of recap the whole thing. Like, if somebody was wondering, okay, what does it look like to actually support the growth of something like this in the Valley or in Mountain Home? Recap what that looks like holistically.
Can I jump in with that, answer that question, Dale, real quick?
Oh, go for it.
Yesterday, I was invited and I took a tour of an AMT program at Spokane Community College.
Nice.
And there were at least 50 young people, college students, manufacturing, working on sheet metal and everything. There were 35 different engines that utilized different technology that they were learning about. They had a they have a Boeing or a GE Gen X jet engine in their facility that they can study, and there was just a degree of enthusiasm. And so, right, having a program like that, and these kids were just going to town. I mean, they weren't slogging around; they were excited. And so, if you want to see some pictures, and if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, Dean Cameron, Top Door Media, I shot a bunch of pictures of what it looks like. Right. Now, I'm pretty sure that a program like that would be, widely accepted in the Mountain Home area, especially as you're talking about, the need for the mechanics and whatnot at the Air Force Base. Do they have a program like that, Dale?
Not directly in Mountain Home, of course, but
yeah.
Dean, it sounds like now's the time to ask you to be part of my manufacturing council. So.
There you go. He was waiting for that one.
To be honest,
yeah, he was waiting for that one, huh?
Yeah.
I want to ask for both of you. This can be a question for both of you. Like, what would success look like in 10 years from now if we were able to dial in some things and get the right people listening to a conversation like this and taking action? Kind of a pipe dream scenario, but what would that look like?
Well, Dean, you first.
Well, my theory in life is the hardest thing to do in life is to start. Yeah. What's it going to take to start a program? What's it going to take to start promoting the industry within the region? I think that there's a good head start, and Dale's the man for the job. It's just getting the word out and starting.
One of the things that stood out to me coming to Mountain Home is the political environment. The administration of this city, Mayor Sykes, is very open and very interested in the young people. He's got young people, and going through the high schools and such. And the commitment of the city, really very high commitment to the young people here. And this question for me is about how many jobs can I create for the 2026 graduating class. I'm not going to do much this year, but 27, there needs to be some real jobs for young people to step into, apprenticeship programs that are budding and beginning to develop and so on. And, what I would like to see is Mountain Home really develop as a strong anchor for the region for manufacturing. And so where we had lead manufacturers here, but then also encouraging down I-84 all the way to bloody Salt Lake City, smaller towns that are developing their shops there. And so the metal cutting's happening from here to there, and materials and electronics. And so there's a continuity, again, leveraging transportation. And that's, when you look at, how are you going to have a prosperous economy? You need to have access to finance. You have to have a legal system where your inventions and your things, your private property is protected. You need to have expertise and transportation and communications. We have all of that. There's no reason for us to build massive cities to build stuff. We have interstates, elegant interstates that we spend a lot of money on that connect our communities and rural communities. And I think with the advent of the dark factory, when you look at what Hadrian is doing and Chris Powers and different things, where basically the community footprint for manufacturing is getting smaller. And so I don't need to house 1,000 people to have a dark factory in my community. I just don't. And then I'm going to have people with higher wages, more sophistication, and potential career paths that can be birthed for these young people coming out of high school and stepping right into the industries that they're really interested in, because they're used to walking around with a computer in their pocket that they can access information on the world anytime they want. I didn't grow up with that. I don't think you did either, Dean. And we were talking about spinning records at the beginning of this call. So, so I think for me, my pipe dream is to see us leverage all of our assets as a region, but Mountain Home is positioned to really lead that and to really inspire other communities to get involved. And so we're going to have plenty of business coming to Mountain Home. I'm pretty excited about it. Conversations I've been having. We're working on infrastructure. We're getting the groundwork done. And as we have more and more shovel-ready properties, manufacturers are going to step up and say, Mountain Home's my home. And so that's my pipe dream.
Yeah. Well, and to go along with that, not to get too deep in the current political environment, but there are some states that are business friendly and other states that are not. And so there's a migration of businesses and people moving to states that will support their business and the economy. And Idaho is on the top of that list.
Right. Right.
Oh, that's amazing. No, that's true. 100%. So as a parting shot, if you could, for anybody that's made it this far, and whether they're a machinist, they're a student, a builder, what would you say is a parting shot for them as far as something that they should be paying attention to that maybe got missed in the last 30 minutes here?
Well, one of the things I offer, in the effort to educate people in the aerospace industry, Northwest Aerospace, I'll learn how to talk. Northwest Aerospace News Magazine is a free industry trade magazine. You can go on the website, northwestaerospacenews.com. It's all spelled out. And there's a subscribe free button. And they can subscribe to the magazine. It goes through and talks about all the different manufacturing companies and what they do. And there's contact information there and so forth. But it's a good opportunity for young people. And I've opened this up to college students to subscribe. And I'll pay the shipping and the cost of print. It's that first step into the education of the industry. So we're happy to provide that.
That's awesome.
So, one of the things that's kind of a brag for this community is the air show. And it's not every year, but it's coming this year. It's May 16th and 17th. They have drag strips going. They're building it like I haven't seen them build before. And so the Thunderbirds will be flying here in Mountain Home May 16th and 17th. Our mayor, who's been intimately involved with the base, done an excellent job of having a strong relationship between the city and the base, will be hosting a VIP event on that Friday, May 15th, to actually meet the pilots and mingle with them. And so everybody on this call is certainly invited to the event. If you want to, be a part of the VIP activity, please let me know, Dale King, at dking at mountain-home.us. So
you can give away your email publicly. Now we're going to get hit up.
Good. Good. That's my job. So, but yeah, and then there's a link for the article down below that Dean was gracious enough to publish for Mountain Home and talk about our story.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. Hey, fellas, it's been great chatting with you. Thank you so much for unpacking your insight into, an industry I think, at least from my world, has been often overlooked, but opens up such incredible possibilities, especially for the next generation to come here. And so looking forward to seeing what both of you guys are going to be doing to champion these kind of changes. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Gordy. You take care. Thanks, Dale.
Thanks, Gordy. It's always a pleasure.
Appreciate it.